honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. This week we are talking to Paul Inglis, who is the art director on, amongst other films, The Rise of Skywalker and Blade Runner 2049. And in this episode, there is a previous episode as well you can listen to as well, but he talks about the challenges of working with a large budget, as he did with both films, and talks a little bit about the production design and the art direction of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. He doesn't say too much because we recorded this before the film came out, but there's still some interesting insight in there. Hope you enjoy. You referenced the marked critical and commercial difference between Blade Runner 2049's reception. And it was a big budget science fiction film, which hopefully we'll see the likes of again. But does working with a film of that budget, does it make your job easier or not? I mean, there's more money available, presumably. I think people have this idea that the production's awash with cash, but you've also got so much more to do with.
Correct. No, I think you're quite right. I mean, I think whether you're doing a tiny film or a giant film, the requirements are by and large the same. I mean, I think the one advantage of a tiny film is that in order to get green lit, there has to be a script. And so you have a framework to know what it is you're trying to achieve. Whereas the reality of the modern day system of these large franchise films, and by the way, Blade Runner actually did have a script that was by and large unchanged, so I'm not actually referring to Blade Runner with this. But for most big films now, it seems, they have a release date and they're creating a film to a release date, and their ability to find a satisfactory story early on in the process is sometimes less good than we might like. I often have found a few times now that the script is a very volatile thing, and so although the money is there, which on paper should make it more straightforward, because the resources are phenomenal. When you look at doing something like, well, any of these films, you have a large number of construction crew, you get to have a good sized art department, you have enough people to be doing all the construction drawings and all those things to get information out, but sometimes it's harder on those films to know what it is you're even aiming for, just because the story is being discovered as you go along, and so that becomes its own stress. So although resources are there, it's a case that information is often coming later than you would like it to be able to plan well for it. So they're different beasts, I suppose. And I think all filmmaking, if you care about it, it involves a lot of energy. It involves putting a lot of yourself into it, and it does involve we're not saving lives. It's just a different kind of stress. It's self-imposed stress, and sometimes you have to remind yourself of that, because you can come off sounding very arrogant and grand, and someone else goes, "Yeah, I'm a paramedic. I saved someone yesterday," or it's a funny world where your biggest stress is, does a set look? Am I keeping a director happy?
Yeah.
But some of these things, like you find yourself in the middle of episode 9, and again, another one of the films that I saw, first film I can remember seeing at the cinema was the original Star Wars, and because there was so much information about how it was made, because there was the Art of Star Wars book, because there were the sketchbooks, because there were TV programs that went into the behind the scenes, it was the first glance for me, the first notion of, these don't just come out fully formed. People plan these and do things to make them. So Star Wars, again, was formative for me in terms of wanting to make films. So to find myself in the middle of that and finishing off that saga, well, for now at any rate, you put certain pressures on yourself. You want to make sure you're not the one who makes Star Wars rubbish. So
you've just alluded to kind of completing the saga. Can you tell us anything about the general experience of getting to work on a Star Wars film?
It's been remarkable. We got to build a very large number of sets for the film. I hope that it will feel very tactile because of that, and that was something that was wonderful about the original in 1977 was that it felt used. It felt like you could reach out and touch things. It didn't feel like there was any. Well, obviously wasn't any CG involved in the original, but even the paintings, I think, through being oil on glass or acrylic on glass, they had that wonderful textured feel. And that's something that we very much tried to retain it. It was exciting to be in those worlds and see those sets. And it's in the trailer, so I think I'm allowed to say it. It's pretty extraordinary to get to walk on the Millennium Falcon. As a fan, as much as anything, that is a moment that stays with you. But we created new places, new worlds as well, and it's such a challenge to try and not just photocopy what's been before, but try and put yourself in the head of the original 70s, 80s art department and say, right, how would they have faced this challenge? What would they have come up with as the answer? Because when you look back at it, actually, Return of the Jedi doesn't look that much like Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back doesn't look that much like Star Wars. There were definite design shifts between the films, even though there were common points, like the spaceships.
Yeah.
But even the versions, the Death Star we see in New Hope is very different to the Death Star interiors that we see in Return of the Jedi.
Absolutely.
And so that even that same crew moved it along, they didn't feel a need to make it all look the same. So there were motifs that were similar, but overall architectural spaces were quite different. And so we've tried to embrace that same notion of saying, okay, what can we do that's new but still feels like it was the same guys answering the questions? And that was exciting to do. It was kind of fascinating to put yourself in that space. And it was wonderful seeing J.J. Abrams' work, wonderful being there firsthand to see the story come together and see the film he wanted to craft.
My penultimate question was going to be to ask you: is there a film or films that you would that you weren't involved with that you admire that our audiences might not have seen in terms of their artistic design?
I think everyone will have seen Baz Luhrmann's films, but I think the very complete worlds he creates are fascinating. You look at Moulin Rouge, or you look at Romeo and Juliet, and they are, again, stunningly tactile, present, theatrical, fascinating spaces to be that absolutely tie into the story he's telling. And it's fascinating, the amount of, I think what people would be surprised by is how hard it is to keep that completeness of vision there, because it's not just about the art department coming in and creating sets and dressing them in a way that fits the vision. Costume obviously has to tie into that, hair and makeup has to tie into that, the way they're shot, what the camera is doing has to tie into that, the way it's edited has to tie into that. Every department has to be driven in the right direction, especially if it's, for instance, you're Baz Luhrmann, you're making Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
No one's made a Shakespeare like that, really.
No, that opening scene in the gas station within 5 minutes. This isn't the Shakespeare that you remember from being in an English class.
No, and somehow as a director, you have to persuade all these kind of grumpy, set in their ways filmmakers who've been doing this for however many years they've been doing it, that you're not just doing it the way they're expecting. You're doing it in this new and interesting way, and it takes a lot of energy to manage that. Then this reminds me of another film I would say that it's worth it would be Richard Loncrane's Richard III. Which again is a beautiful piece of very lateral design work. So not a big budget film, and not one where they could just build set after set. It was a fascinating use of locations. The Brighton Pavilion as Buckingham Palace and all these things. It was an extraordinary vision to create such a complete look for that film, only predominantly using available locations. It's absolutely stunning.
And is it? I mean, talking about Baz Luhrmann, is it? Does it come down to that singularity of vision? Does that come down to the strength of personality? This idea of an auteur.
Well, I haven't worked with him, so obviously I'm guessing. But he has a fair few key crew he works with all the time, especially as production designer. And it becomes easier for him, I suppose, that as once he's created Romeo and Juliet, once people have seen it, people know what to expect from him. So then it's more straightforward to bring people in line with your vision. But I think it just takes tirelessness. I think it takes someone having a very clear vision of what they want, because it's hard to imagine something like that happening. The amount of planning that has to go into creating it, you can't just come up with it on the day. But it takes huge amounts of energy, huge amounts of stamina, and huge amounts of patience to keep telling people over and over again, no, keep course correcting, keep saying, that's great, but more like this, please. This is what we're after. This is what we're trying to generate. And I don't know how he works. Different people do it different ways. Some people have mood boards they want to show, or directors will have key illustrations, or sometimes people will run a film. They'll say, right, I want everyone to sit and look at this film, and I'll explain to you why I think it's important, or whatever it might be. Every director is different. But I think the common ground is the sheer amount of stamina and patience they need to deal with the same question over and over and over again.
And so that concludes our chat with Paul. If you want to hear more from that interview, especially a much deeper dive into the art direction of Blade Runner 2049, do check out the other episode. Of course, also please subscribe and follow us. That really helps. If you want more film stories, of course, there's our print magazine. This month's issue is about to release, and cover stars Kermode and Mayo, of course, of the flagship BBC film review show. On top of that, of course, you can always listen to our amazing podcasts. There's Film Stories Junior, which is available also through our website, along with the print magazine. The website is filmstories.co.uk. Every day there's longer form writing and news stories on there. And you can follow the entire Film Stories project at Film Stories Pod. Thanks for tuning in this week. I'll be back next week with more film stories. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.